Hey, how's it going everybody? It's your boy, and Independence Day is upon us. After 3 years of bullshit, when we have gone through how many months, how many years of negotiations, how many times have we seen the Ramonas try desperately to curtail Brexit, to stop it from happening, how many times have we seen our own elected representatives within Parliament try to railroad it and stop it from happening, from trying to not do the very thing we employ them to do, which is to carry out the will of the British people. Finally, at about 11 o'clock tonight, Britain will be independent from the European Union, and we can set about doing our own thing in the world, finding our own place in the world once again, and being in control somewhat of our own sovereignty and our own. Now, this video is not going to be a video about Ramona Salt. It's not going to be about the Remainers doing what they usually do, which is to cry and sulk about not getting things their own way. I'm not going to gloat at them. Instead, this is a video about what I want from Brexit, what I think the UK should do post-Brexit in order to create the best country possible. And I think I'll try and limit it to maybe 5 things, maybe more. Most of it will not be in any particular order or preference, but I do think we must start with the most fundamental one, and that is number one. We must continue pushing for more and more powers for us from the EU, because the current deal as it stands is that we're still beholden to them in many different ways. The deal that Boris Johnson signed was only something that was slightly better than the Chequers deal that Theresa May got way back. We need to continue, whether this takes a long time or not, I don't know. We need to continue negotiating for further freedoms. We need to make sure that Northern Ireland is not isolated, whilst at the same time gaining more and more freedoms until we really are a proper sovereign nation. But at the moment, what we've got is what we've got, and we're going to have to work with it until we can get back to the negotiations table. Number 2, we need to keep the union intact, because just because we are finally free from the European Union doesn't mean we're necessarily free from the cultural forces that would wish to disrupt and divide our union. We currently still have a massive Scottish nationalist party that are agitating to break away Scotland from the Union. They are incessantly crowing about how Brexit will damage Scotland, it will damage this, damage that, and that they should break away, when it's very clear that Scotland is very much reliant upon the rest of the Union to basically saddle its own debt for economic reasons. And we should continue to foster the culture of this country, should continue to make sure we become more united and less divided, because we've not really been the most united of countries recently, and that's not just on the cultural front, very much on the political side of things as well. And as a whole, it's not just gender ideologues or racial ideologues, it is literally the Welsh, the English, Scots and the Northern Irish being driven apart by nationalist forces, or as I like to call them, subversives. I think we need to create, as was attempted way back in the 1700s, but this time we need to actually succeed in creating a more of a British identity. You can still feel English if you want, you can still feel Scottish, Welsh and hell, even Irish, but we're British. We're in a union for a reason. We do have a shared culture. It's about time we actually embrace that culture. It's about time we strengthen it. We strengthen the bonds between us all, and we continue alongside that path. I don't know how we're going to do it. I don't know what shape it will take. I am not an expert on these things. I'm not somebody who can tell you what it will be. But I think if we do look to the past, but also to the future, maybe some of the positive things that have come out, even of the present, that can create a British identity that can last another 300 years. But what form that will take, how we're going to do it, I don't know. But what I can tell you is we should probably get rid of devolution because it's failed utterly. But that's another topic for another video. Number 3, we need to rebuild our armed forces, particularly the Navy. Since we're going to be on our own, quote unquote, at least in terms of security, we're still going to be part of NATO, we're still going to probably be involved with some European power over some kind of issue in the Middle East or somewhere across the world, and we most likely will still be in the so-called special relationship with America. I still think, because we are going to be our own sovereign nation with our own interests and our own goals, we're going to need to be more reliant upon ourselves, and that means rebuilding the Navy. At the moment in the English Channel, the French have far more boats and ships than we do protecting the coast, believe it or not. Our Navy is the weakest it's ever been. We need to increase its strength, we need to increase its ability to fight, because at the moment it can't even save our own trading vessels in the Persian Gulf from Iran. They were literally saying that we're going to find this really difficult, we're going to find it impossible even to defend as many ships as we possibly can. That's not something that the British Navy ought to be in. That is not something that the British Navy should even be saying. We should be able to protect our trade, we should be able to protect our citizens all over the world, because not only are we protecting British citizens and our crown dependencies, we have the Commonwealth, which more on them later. We also need to protect them too, because we have another cultural bond with those countries. And the Navy, considering we're an island nation without a navy or a very strong navy is a weak island. It's an island ripe for conquest. And if people like Guy Verhofstadt continue to gain power in Europe, people like him who want to turn it into an imperialistic project, we're going to have to protect ourselves. You never know if somebody from the extremist end of his ideas might end up thinking that perhaps Europe should conquer other countries within Eurasia, because you never know. What do you think is the logical outcome of his imperialistic outbursts? The Navy and also the Royal Air Force as well, that's in a much better shape than the Navy, and especially the Army, they need to be improved, they need to be strengthened, because we need to project our own power. We can't rely on other nations. Our greatest ever ally, the Americans, usually aren't the very best of allies at the very worst of times. So it's about time we take some onus upon ourselves, we take some personal responsibility, and we protect ourselves, basically. And if need be, project that power onto others if we're threatened. That might sound a bit jingoistic, a bit nationalistic, but we have our own security reasons, we have our own national interests abroad and at home, and I think a good military is a way to help those things. Number 4, encourage better relations with the Commonwealth. We have, for a very long time, since we joined the European market and later on the European Union with the Treaty of Maastricht, we've not abandoned the Commonwealth, but we have neglected them for many, many decades. The Commonwealth, literally a friendship group of countries with a shared history. Some cultural values are the same and things like that, and we share language, and it's something that will help foster security, trade, and good relations. And I think for a long time now, been so heavily invested in Europe, in a place that has not been good to us for decades, that we've lost touch with them. And there's a huge market, a worldwide market of Commonwealth nations who are very interested in rekindling relationships. We already have countries like Canada, Australia, Fiji even, of the smaller ones, New Zealand, India, the various African nations that were part of our empire, the Caribbean. We've got so many nations all over the world that are willing to have free trade deals with us. They won't even think twice about entering into a deal with us. That why not? It's a no-brainer. Before we start talking to the Americans, before we start talking to the various European countries, let's go back to our old friends. It's a no-brainer. Not only that, we need to make sure that we protect these countries from rising superpowers like China, regional powers like Iran. And again, I know that sounds pretty boomery and a bit imperialistic, but we have allies. We're far closer to them than we are to the Americans and the Europeans. That, again, it's a no-brainer. Closer relations, better economic policies towards them and them towards us. And I think we will ride the economic difficulties that will arise from leaving the European Union. And let's not forget that the Commonwealth is also made up of countries that were never actually colonised or indeed controlled by our country. There are countries that want to get involved with us, who want to become part of it because there are massive benefits. And I think, again, that's a no-brainer. We can create the second empire without it being an empire. It will just be a collection of friendly nations who will back each other up and trade with each other. It's like a Hanseatic League almost, but it's worldwide. And number 5, and this is similar to the Commonwealth, but we just need to continue what we're doing with the Commonwealth with the rest of the world, which is to be a good business partner, maybe even a good ally. Again, we have allies in the European Union we've been allied with for nearly 1,000 years, like Portugal, for example. Continue good relations with trade and business, maybe even security, and things can go ticking along nicely. And perhaps a 6th thing I want is the culture war to end with the forces of the Marxists and the globalists and the internationalist right defeated. But that's, again, maybe part of a separate video, but I think Brexit should help us foster some kind of cultural movement, some political movement that can help get rid of the growing tyranny within this country. We now have to decide for ourselves. We have a lot of questions that need to be answered. Now that we've dealt with the more international aspect of our identity, which is, are we part of Europe in terms of more integration, become part of a superstate, or are we British? Are we our own separate identity from them? We now answered that question. We are separate. That doesn't mean we hate them. That doesn't mean they hate us. We're just not the same. That's not the path we want to go down. We now have to decide for ourselves. Who are we? What are we? We shouldn't have to. I don't think it's right that we should. But unfortunately, there are growing questions about British, English, Scottish, Welsh, Irish identity that need to be addressed again because of demographic change, cultural change, political change, and things like that. That is now the thing we need to turn to. We do need to turn to the domestic issues. We need to sort out our domestic issues because for a very long time now, because of Brexit being such a distraction for many, many years, we've left a lot of things that need to be addressed and they're open wounds. We need to heal these wounds. We need to sort these problems out. And we all know what these problems are. They have been in the news recently. Censorship, the rape gangs across the country, crime rising in our cities, at least some of the cities anyway, like London, for example, homelessness, poverty, ideological subversion. We need to deal with these issues. And part of that is deciding, as a people, who are we? What are we? Or what are we going to be for the next 1,000 years, basically? Again, these are really massive questions and issues that are going to take decades to fix. Even though we have a lot of failure in our history, we have probably more successes. And I think, ultimately, being positive, I think we'll deal with these issues. I think we will, for the most part, successfully manage them. So, anyway, those are the 6 things that I want from Brexit. Some of them are probably a bit more short-term. Some of them are a bit more long-term. We might not even reach those goals. Some of them seem to be a bit too lofty and idealistic, especially, sorting out poverty and crime. They're always going to be a thing. But at the very least, mitigating them, making them problems aren't as bad as they once were, to be negligible, is what I think to be far more achievable than letting them foster and grow. So, anyway, that's all I've got for today, guys. So, I'll see you later, and happy Independence Day.